Welcome back, everybody, to Authors Vox. This episode, I am joined by the incredible Holly Ryans, who has written Revelations, an excellent and personally my favorite and first and only so far romantasy book that I've ever read. It's an excellent story about two people who were fated to meet each other, but have done so at the wrong time. Holly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, I am H.A.Ryans. Like he said, I wrote Revelations. This is my debut novel. Not the first book that I've written, but the first one that has been worthy enough to publish. So I'm so grateful that you read it and that this is your introduction to romantasy or paranormal romance.
I yeah, I read it. I was reading it, and my partner was like, "Oh, is that is what she calls a spicy novel?" And I said, "Yes, but there hasn't been much spice yet." And she goes, "Wait till you get about here," and she points to roughly the middle of the book, and she was right. I'm like, "Okay, all right, okay."
Yep. There is a bit
Um,
of a formula.
yeah, yeah. There's something I was unaware of that you have to follow. I did not know that. So this was quite possibly the best entrance I could have had to this world of romantic literature. Um, okay. The first question I ask everybody who's on the pod for the first time is, "What is your favorite magic system?" Now that can come from movies, TVs, games, card games, anything you'd like.
So I am not a massive player of like D&D and that sort of thing. My partner and our son is. So I had to kind of sit and think back of what my exposures to systems of magic have been. Um, and as an author, to the surprise of no one, I'm also a pretty avid reader. And recently, I was exposed to Rachel Gillig's gothic fantasy duology of The Shepherd King. And it's two books, obviously, duology. One
Hmm.
Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns. And her system of magic, there are people that have inherent magic, but they are yeah, so different cards exhibit different powers, and the female main character has, because she does have inherent magic that she's been able to hide, she is able to absorb powers from the cards.
That's so cool. That is
It
actually
was
quite possibly one of the coolest systems that anyone's brought up so far. That's good. That's good to know.
well, and the particular card that she touches as a young child is the monster card, and so now she has this entity living inside of her head. So
Okay,
it's a whole
terrifying.
separate
Okay,
character. Very cool.
that's awesome. Okay, that's very cool. I have never heard of those books before, but now I feel like I have to read them. Um, so you said this is your first book that you've had. Wait, your words were worthy of being published. How
Yes.
long have you been writing?
So I started when I was very young. Technically, my first published book was when I was 11. I wrote a story with my best friend called The Amazing Flower Adventure. And my stepdad, who had been in the publishing industry, was able to have a few copies of that printed. And we kind of sold them to friends and family. But I have been a writer my entire life. I moved away from it during college because I was writing peer-reviewed papers, but
Yeah,
this is my delve back into fiction writing.
uh, that's incredibly nice to have as a young child, is to have your published work.
Yeah.
That's
I
so sweet.
still I still have it. I pulled it out the other day and I took a peek at it, and it was I was struggling with the my work in progress right now. And so being able to
Mhm.
hold, this copy and see, that compared to this, and it's like, okay,
Mhm.
I can keep going.
Yeah. If you do you look at it now, you edit, you're like, well, the prose here is just weak, or what? Like, do you just any?
Absolutely. Like, what
Yeah,
was 11-year-old me thinking?
yeah.
Gosh.
You're like, it's completely derivative of Stephen King. I don't know what I'm doing here. Um,
Yes.
so in that case, if you could think back as early as this, was there a specific inspiration that pushed you into writing, or was there a moment in your childhood that you felt like, oh, I'm gonna be a writer?
Yes. So I struggled with writing. I struggled with reading. I was a very, very late reader. And when I was in fifth grade, I was still really not a proficient reader. Uh, and my fifth grade teacher gave me a copy of Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. It is a very poignant World War II Holocaust
Hmm.
story. And it just really resonated with me. And being able to get into that story allowed me to develop as a reader. From that moment, I remember thinking, okay, I want to write stories that are going to help people get into reading.
That's something I think we desperately need now is people to get into reading. So literacy
Absolutely.
continues. um,
Absolutely. It's a
in
dying
that case,
art.
it's such a dying art. It's crazy. In that case, where did the idea for Revelations come from?
So I teach at a micro school. I teach literature and I teach history, but I have my background is in
Nice.
musical theater and the
Oh,
arts,
okay.
and so I incorporate a lot of the arts into my lessons with my students. I think it makes it easier for them to digest, to comprehend, and it sort of bridges the gap between just talking at them, lecturing them, and giving them something a little bit more to get that left brain, right brain connection. And I was teaching about ancient Egypt and when the Egyptians invaded Nubia and the consequences of that. And I used some music from the opera Aida as well as the Broadway show of Aida,
Oh,
which
okay.
is about the Egyptians invading Nubia.
Hmm.
And in my mind, I thought, okay, what would a modern day sort of inspired tale like this look like? But instead of using Egyptians and Nubians, use something that gives me a little bit more artistic freedom to incorporate a little bit of magic, a little bit of powers, this sort of thing, and what that would look like. So I ended up using angels and demons, and being able to bridge that gap for the kids just sort of put it in my head, and I thought, oh, okay. And then the wheels just started turning rapidly, and 5 weeks later this book was written.
Uh,
Badly, badly, but written.
written, went through an editing process. I'm glad you brought up the angels and the demons because that is, I think, at its core, that is what the book focuses on is angels and demons, and you've done it in this very interesting way that I haven't seen much. Um, they have obviously been around since well before Christianity, the concept of angels and demons, and
Absolutely.
they have and the hierarchy of these different beings. But at one point, Lydia mentions wing scars, and the demons are constantly talking about hiding their horns. Why did you make the decision to have these two groups exist sort of behind the scenes rather than the much more common take of being the ruling class in a certain society?
um that was a bit of a selfish decision. I wanted to
Okay.
wanted I wanted to touch on sort of the oblivious nature that humans have, and I wanted to tie this in with um literacy rates falling. And I think
Hmm.
that it, because as a human race, we can get so locked into what's important to us that we begin to ignore that around us. So I didn't want it to be directly in your face of, these humans are absolutely ignoring everything that's going around them, but I did want to put these angels and demons sort of under the surface, so that even within human nature and living alongside of humans, they had their own hierarchy, they had their own systems, but that those systems are integrated into, they work with police systems, they work with local government, but all of that is sort of kept from the humans around them. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to touch on how I think Felix even says to Astrid at one point, like, we don't have to hide our horns because the humans are so conditioned that they don't see them. So,
Yeah, which I agree is very much, I think, the case with humanity right now is we just don't notice things we don't ask about.
mhm.
Um it's interesting that you have this sort of dichotomy between the two because obviously historically and even in the book the demons and the angels are kind of at odds. Um, and the main point of the book is to get them to work together through this marriage that's been arranged. However, I would say, the two most obvious, not contenders was the word I'm looking for. The two most obvious people in this sort of, you know, setup are Lydia and Astrid, and they are polar opposites, and it's very clear in there, very, very Glinda and Elphaba, essentially.
Yes.
Was there any time in the planning process where you were thinking, maybe I just make them enemies, or was that idea not totally on the table?
Yeah, that thought absolutely crossed my mind. When I wrote the story, I knew where I kind of wanted it to go, but I didn't know exactly how that was going to happen. And I had the plot in my head, but I didn't have the characters fully developed in my head. So I tried as I was writing to let them grow organically. And there was definitely a time in there when I thought, okay, Lydia and Astrid cannot come back from this. They will just be sworn enemies forever. And then, reincarnation plays a big part in this story as well. So I thought maybe they can have this redemption arc, maybe in another lifetime, or maybe this is more than just a standalone. Maybe this is a duology. Um, but as I continued writing and discovering how Lydia was changing, but how Astrid was changing as well, there was this meeting of the minds, and I won't say that either of them are perfect at the end of the story or the way that they developed or the way that they chose to handle things. And that was a big thing that I wanted to do. The whole point of the story is not one person or not one group of people is good and another is inherently bad. And so I wanted both of those characters to have flaws and have places where they could grow, but also on the inside of who they were. They weren't bad people. They just had so much bias behind them and so much trauma and so much hurt. And for Lydia, her trauma and her hurt came up in sort of these expectations that were placed on her, but she was never given consent about where she wanted her life to go. And in her mind, she just kind of went along with it because that was the way it always was. So, sort of breaking some of those generational curses and that sort of thing.
That's an excellent point, especially the idea of, inherent good and evil, and segues me perfectly into my next question, about fathers. Now, two of the main, I'm going to say, the main antagonists of the story are Ezra and Jackson, the fathers of Felix and Lydia, respectfully. Without giving away too much, because they are a huge part of the novel. They are a very obvious contrast between the two of themselves, and yet somehow the same. Both of them, one of them who should be inherently good and one who should be inherently evil, both of them are, in a sense, inherently evil. Was their inclusion in the story meant to be a contrast between their beliefs and their children's, to show children, their adult children, to show, times changing, or were they meant to be more of like a staunch sort of antagonist role where they're just going to be in the way regardless?
Both.
Okay,
um,
fair. Yeah, good
yeah,
answer.
definitely. Despite the fact that they are not my main characters, Jackson and Ezra were the driving force behind the plot of the story. They are the ones that sort of
Mhm.
keep the plot either moving or not moving, depending on what time period you're looking at. And definitely, I wanted them to be a dichotomy against each other. But like you said, they are two sides of the same coin. They're both manipulative and self-serving, but they both, what they represent is so very different. One that, like you said, is supposed to be good, and then another that is supposed to be bad. But like I said, the whole point of this book is that nothing is all good or all bad, and that there is uh redemption. Everything is redeemable, but everything is corruptible as well. And it's based
Mhm.
off of, choices that we make, and actions that we do, and relationships that we establish. And obviously a big part of this book again is sort of this separation of church and state. So I wanted both of them to have ties to their government or their monarchy, whichever, you know group you're looking at. And I wanted their actions to reflect not just their own selfishness, but the selfishness of those that they represented. And I think that they both got an ending that that
Yeah.
served their purpose. um,
Right.
um, I think that they both ended up where they were supposed to be. So,
Totally fair. Totally fair. I think they ended up where they should have been too. So,
and then I
um,
also, obviously, with their ties, as a generation who is really figuring ourselves out from our parents, I wanted that reflected in the story as well, because again, this sort of disruption of generational curses, and doing things the way that they've always been done versus what feels right or wrong. Um, I wanted I wanted that shown through Ezra
mhm.
and Jackson.
I think you did magnificently, in my opinion. Especially when we talk about, how it changes when learning from your parents, and the person who I would say learns the most from their parent and how not to be someone is Felix. And if we talk about the selfish aspects of the leaders, we also have to talk about the selfless aspects of some leaders, and in this case, Felix. At the beginning of the novel, Felix is in a loveless political marriage. His father-in-law is clearly using him, Ezra. His mate is his wife's best friend slash sister slash assistant, and he's living in Manhattan in an apartment that might as well have been part of the temperance movement. I guess my question for you is, why do you hate him? Why did you decide to do that to him?
That is a very fair question. And I have to counter and say I don't hate him, but going into the story, I knew from the very beginning that Felix was going to break the cardinal rule in romance, and that
Mhm.
is that you cannot have a main character that is adulterous. And that, I mean, that is that's in romance. I know you're not a huge
Mhm.
romance reader, but that's the hard line in the sand. But obviously, going into this book, who the mates are and who they're not. And
Mhm.
I I knew that Felix was going to break that rule, and so I needed my I needed my readers to really feel bad for him. And so he
Good
is
job.
definitely he's definitely
Yeah.
going through it at the beginning of the book. And I tend to write what is known as green flag men. I don't write sort of the morally gray, uh,
Mhm.
red flag men. But being adulterous is a big red flag, and Felix does have that going for him. But generally in the beginning of the book, he is just a good guy, and he's trying to make the right decision. He's trying to do the right
Mhm.
thing for his people, and putting himself on the chopping block for that to happen. And I wanted it to be that he was old enough to know, like, if he had found his mate, he would have never made these decisions. He would have gone sort of the selfish route of, no, I'm going to be with who I'm supposed to be and have the love that I'm supposed to have. But since that didn't happen, now I can be selfless and do this other thing, when it's really just a matter of, no, you didn't find what you were looking
Yeah.
for. So but yeah, he's definitely going through it at the beginning. And also I loved writing him and Oliver. It
Mhm.
felt, uh I think that we put such a stigma on men that they have to handle so many things alone, And I wanted Felix to be able to have friends that he could legitimately lean on, and I wanted that on page. I felt like that was important to not only the story, but also to any men who might read the book, that like, hey, you don't have to do this alone. You can talk to your friends.
Yeah. Big supporter of men's mental health. That's good. That is nice to see, especially in a form of literature that I know for a fact is oftentimes skewed more to female mental health perspective, and it should be. It should be include all mental health.
For sure.
But we talked about, yeah, I was absolutely. Oliver also, just as a, what an excellent inclusion. I thought he was great. He made me laugh quite a bit. But we did talk for a moment there. I did mention Manhattan, and location seems to be a big thing for these two specific groups. So you have to have territory, obviously. The Angels have Manhattan, which is also an excellent The Angels Take Manhattan is an excellent Doctor Who episode from 2000 whatever. And the Demons have Brooklyn. Why Manhattan and Brooklyn? What drove that decision? Why those two boroughs?
Um, I wrote notes on this because I knew I was going to lose my train of thought.
In your
So
defense, that question is like fourth in line, and I realized it wouldn't make any sense until we got to the rest of the questions.
it's fine, totally fine. Um, so culturally, Manhattan and Brooklyn kind of had the vibes that I was going for. When you look at Manhattan, you kind of look at, the Upper East Side and people being a little bit more. I don't want to offend any New Yorkers here. But,
If I'm
there
being
is
completely honest with you, the odds of someone from New York listening to this very low. So yeah, I think you're
you
okay.
never know.
Yeah.
But Manhattan does have a tendency to be, touristy and a little pretentious, and there is a lot of
Mhm.
money there. And then you kind of look at Brooklyn, and it can be a little grittier. It can be a little more skewed toward uh, artistic folks and that sort of thing. So it already had the foundation for the sort of dichotomy that I was looking for, where these two groups were from. I also, as a nod to sort of the source material, this is a Broadway show and an opera, which is based, Broadway in New York,
Mhm.
and so it was fun to just sort of have that subtle nod to the original story. Um,
Fair enough.
and then I wish I had a better answer, but I love New York. I live in a very sleepy little beach town on a little island. And if I didn't live here, I would live in
In New York.
probably somewhere in New York. I love it. I know it. So it was easy to write. My
Mhm.
best friend also lives in New York. And so for the things that I was like, wait a minute, this subway line and that one. And then I would call her and be like, hey, help. And she was able to
Fair
do
enough.
that. But also and I wanted uh oh my goodness, what's the word I'm looking for? I wanted an urban setting. This story I
Right.
don't think would have worked in even a suburban or a country for sure setting. It wouldn't work. And I had my choice. I could have done Dallas. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas, so I could have done sort of the Dallas Fort Worth pull,
Mhm.
but New York just felt right. And it was a nod to Broadway.
Fair enough. I mean, and I also, you have two of the most powerful uh, pseudo shadow governments in the world, and they're now in the most powerful city in the world, essentially. So it does make sense.
Right.
Um,
Well, and I touched on that too, that sort of the center of these two, monarchy and government. I don't want to say democracy because it's not
mhm.
that cut and dry, but you have the monarchy versus the demon government. And I did talk about how, in ancient times it was in Rome, and then it just kind of follows wherever the center of culture
Human
is at that
civilization.
point.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that completely tracks. The other place that you go to, however, well, the story doesn't really go to, but the demons do, is Canada. Do you know where in Canada they went by
I
chance?
do. I do. I don't want to say because I took liberties but I have a good friend who has been a part of this journey from the beginning. She is from Canada, and so I had gone up to visit her, and I needed the demons to get out of New York for a little bit,
Hmm.
and I thought, okay, where can I send them that's close enough, far enough away, and I can mix up weather patterns and have it make a little bit of sense.
Right. Yeah.
But I did take
Yep.
a lot of creative liberties when I did that. But just driving around the town that she's from, I was able to say, okay, this hotel is close to the water, and this is the view, and I can make that work. But mostly it was just from up
Fair.
here.
So what town was it?
Like I said, I don't want to say. Plus, I don't want to
I
say where she's from.
Also fair. What was the county or region? Are we in Ontario or are we in Quebec?
We're
Or
in
neither?
Ontario.
Okay, Ontario. Okay, fair enough. So am I. So this is good. This is good to
Oh,
know.
okay. Perfect.
So you've been to Canada then, obviously, to visit this friend
A few times. Yeah.
a few times. Okay, that's all I really wanted to know. I'm like, were you just making it up? Were you just did you see the
No,
snow somewhere and you're like, I'm gonna send him to Canada? This
no,
is good to
no. And
know.
it's funny because we I was talking with this friend recently about the weather patterns because I live very close to the equator on this little island, and it is
Mhm.
definitely hotter in Canada right now than it is
It's
where I
killing
am.
me. Yeah.
Sorry,
You
guys.
can't see it. Yeah, you can't see it because the camera doesn't show this, but I'm actually sweating profusely right now because I have to have the windows closed and the fan off so nothing gets picked up by the mic. So it is currently 34 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what Fahrenheit is. I've never been very good at that, but
It's in the
it's disgusting.
high 80s, low 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful.
I feel
That actually
great.
makes me
Sorry.
sad. that that it's actually colder where you are than where I am makes me incredibly sad. Um, what was I gonna say? So, moving away from location for a second, and I mentioned this at the beginning where we talked about the formula. There's like three straight chapters in the book that are explicit, and when I say explicit, I mean incredibly explicit. Now, I never read anything like that. How hard is it for you to like write these scenes? Is there a threshold, or do you sometimes go past it and you're like, maybe I have to dial this back. Maybe this is too much. Have you ever said that?
Um, yes, for sure. Absolutely, I have. This is very outside of my comfort zone. And just to backtrack a little bit, when I started writing this book, I was going through my own sort of deconstruction from evangelical religion. And
Hmm.
that's very obvious in the book. I didn't try to hide that at all. Um,
Fair.
and so moving into sort of spicy, explicit scenes was a step outside of my comfort zone. And I just kind of wrote those scenes and then just, you know, as it happened, I just did that. And then I figured I would go back and edit it and see what beta readers said and my editor said. And there were times when I thought, wow, I'm pushing this way too far. In
Hmm.
the romance genre, it's not even it's not even on the high side of
Right.
explicit.
I have
I
learned
guess
that
what would
since writing these questions. So I'm curious to see if there was like a point where you're like, okay, maybe this was too much.
right. Um, yeah, I definitely had that thought, but in the same breath, I knew that a lot of my target audience was going to be people who were going through the same journey that I was and have dealt with sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? Not the prejudices, but the sort of shame and guilt that comes with reading or thinking or fantasizing and that sort of thing. And I wanted to make sure that I stayed true to their story and make sure that that internalized guilt and stuff that Astrid would be feeling in that moment that was pushed through to come out on the other side of it and realize that this is an okay natural thing. Um, my dad read the book, and so
Oh,
I did get
Oh
a
boy.
text message from my dad that was, that he skimmed those scenes, and I appreciated that, but, um,
Oh man.
he
Okay. Yeah.
he had said that, he was proud of me for sort of overcoming a lot of what they had put on me as a child
Hmm.
for the difference between right and wrong, and, with something that is shouldn't be considered right and wrong, so
Hmm. Well, that's very nice to hear, I imagine. Especially in response to scenes that he had to skim over. But
for sure.
I think, yeah, I think for me personally, I read them and um I thought the entire book was great, but the chemistry between the two characters in those moments feels very real, which lends a level of authenticity to it, which I thought was uh excellent and really well done and really well written. I have two
Thank
more
you.
questions for you that are structured. And then
Okay.
I have 10 rapid fire questions because
Alrighty.
we're teetering on the edge of time here and I don't want to keep you too long.
Okay.
Um we've already talked about this, and this you actually are probably a great person to answer this particular question, but literacy rates are struggling in North America as a whole for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
If you're standing in front of a class, your class, a high school, doesn't matter, is there, if you were asked to give one good reason to students why they should be reading and why they should be writing, what would you tell them?
It's not always physically possible to step outside of your culture and your bubble in real life circumstances. But when you open up a book, you are exposed to things that you may not necessarily encounter in real life. And you are going to question your biases and your prejudices. You will be a kinder, stronger, more respectful person simply by reading someone else's story. And whether that's fiction or nonfiction, whether it's romance or horror or fantasy, it is going to change your perspective on life, bar none. And I tell that to my kids fairly often. And it's part of the reason why I teach at a micro school. Um, because in the public school system now, they are reading maybe one full book a year, but mostly it's excerpts and this sort of thing. Whereas we require we read two books a semester, and then
Good.
it's discussion and papers written and all that. And you just don't get that in the public school system now. So I really enjoy teaching where I teach for that reason.
That's a perfect answer. I myself, I'm a high school teacher. I teach English
Okay.
and history, funny enough. Um, but I think that's the perfect answer to give to students. Here in Ontario, are recently the big news story. I don't know if your friend mentioned this, is that to combat low literacy rates, the Ontario government has decided to just lower the literacy goals instead of actually approaching. Yeah, what a stupid idea, right? Which to my chagrin has not changed as much as I'd like. But we're in, as we've talked about, a literacy crisis. Students don't want to read anymore. Kids don't want to read anymore because they don't have to.
No.
Um,
And with the emergence of AI, there's
oh
even
God,
less reason for them to read and write. And
yeah,
I tell my students all the time, this AI bubble is probably going to burst at some point, and the way that you can stay ahead of it is by reading,
yeah,
because
and they
eventually
don't
you're
know.
going to need
I've
those skills again.
Oh, absolutely. They don't know. They use AI for everything. And I'll ask, I remember we were reading, my grade 10 applied class was reading The Maze Runner. And I remember I used to give chapter questions every night. And it took me a little bit longer to realize than I'd like. But one day, every single one of them had the exact same answer for one of the questions. None of them had talked to each other. And they all just had the same answer. So I was like, okay, who used AI? And everybody put their hands up. I'm like, bold of you to admit it, but also
Just
now you've all failed. So
at least you're honest.
yeah, it's like at least you told the truth, I guess. Um, it is a problem, and I could commiserate all day. But we talked about this, and this is your first book that's been published. Let's say we have an author listening who's trying to get their books published. uh, what has your experience been as an indie author? Are there clear positives? Are there negatives? Are you looking for silver linings along the way? And is there any advice you would offer someone who would like to publish?
Yeah. So obviously when you look into publishing, you have your trad versus indie, and there's pros and cons to both. For me, I knew that this book was going to be indie published because once you get a trad deal, they have rights to the story. And I was absolutely married to the ending of this story because I wanted to stay
Hmm.
true to the source material. And I knew that in the romance genre, this was going to be a tough ending to sell, and I was unwilling to compromise on it. So for me, indie publishing, Revelations in particular, was a no brainer. It is a lot to figure out, but when you have other indie authors in your corner, the community is just incredible about coming together and helping you figure out, okay, I have to buy ISBN numbers, and then I need to file a copyright, and then how do I get ARCs to work, and how do I upload into KDP? If I don't want to use KDP, what are my other options? And it's such a tight knit community that if you find a support network of people, indie publishing is absolutely fantastic. Trad publishing does a lot of the work for you, but getting there can be hard and can be really discouraging. I don't think one is better than the other. I think each have their pros and cons. Also, with declining literacy rates, all sales across all genres are down right now, which can be incredibly disheartening. But just reach out to those around you. They make it better. I
Yeah.
promise.
That's good.
So, but
That's
I think it's important because if you have a story to tell and that story resonates with one person, was it worth it? For me, the answer is
absolutely.
yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Uh, you made a lot of great points. You were throwing a lot of acronyms there that I had never heard of until I started this. So I'm
Oh,
sure someone who's trying to publish for the first time is just like, what am I doing? Um
I'll make a list.
yeah, just set it out. I think that was good. No, that was absolutely excellent. And if I hope people who are listening to this, if they take one thing away, it's to pick up Revelations, because if I'm being completely honest, it was a phenomenal book. And it's very rare for me to sit through, not sit through, that's the wrong wording, to sit down at about a halfway point in a book and then not be able to put it down until I'm finished, which was the case for this.
Yay.
And it was, I think it's very well done. And
Thank
to
you.
close out, we have one thing left, and that's our 10 would you rather questions, which are in a
Okay.
way somewhat related to our topic of conversation today, Revelation. So I'm gonna
Okay.
fire them off. You just say one or the other. Don't even think about it, and we'll just go.
I'm
So first
terrified.
and
Let's go.
foremost, that's okay. Everybody is. Don't worry. Pen and paper or computers?
Oh, pen and paper.
Google Docs or Microsoft Word?
Microsoft Word.
Edit as you go or after you're finished?
Oh, is my editor gonna listen to this? Edit as I go.
I
She's gonna kill me.
Okay. uh, card games or board games?
Board games.
Beach day or hike day?
I live at the beach. Beach.
I I figured that was going to be the answer. Um, rock music or pop music?
Rock.
Mythology or Arthurian legend?
Mythology.
Movies or TV?
Neither. Books.
Neither is okay. That's an okay answer. Which then makes this one, the next one, a little bit different. So I'll change it. Long novels or short novels?
Long.
And finally, tea or coffee?
Tea.
Okay, good answers. All right. Well,
I would love to drink coffee, but my heart does not allow it. So I
totally
have to
fair.
stick with tea.
I'm a tea person myself. I've never been a big coffee person, so that I totally feel you on that. Thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. Would you like to promote anything?
I don't think so. This was absolutely fantastic. Your questions were so in depth and made me think about my story in ways I hadn't anticipated. So thank you for pushing me.
Fantastic. Okay, that's what I was looking for, is for people to consider. Everybody, you should pick up Revelations. The glare in here is ridiculous, but this is what the book looks like. I got mine off Amazon, but I'm sure there's other places that are much more author friendly in terms of buying that you can get them. Um, uh, Thank you so much for everyone who's listening, and yeah, thank you so much, Holly, for being here. That was very
Thank
well
you so
done.
much, Nick. This was so much fun.
Amazing. Keep an eye out for Holly's other works, and check her out on Instagram. It's Island Holly Ann, right? On
Island
Instagram.
author H.A. Ryans.
Island author H.A.Ryans. If you're listening to this, you may have seen the promo videos, but thank you so much, and stay magical, my friends.